I'm Sam Pisani, Managing Partner at the Logit Group, and welcome to the first in our Logit Influencer Series. Our goal is to shine a light on the market research industry and discuss where the industry is going and what's next. Today, we'll be taking a look at the technology and innovative advancements in the MR space for 2021 and beyond. Joining us today at the Innovators Roundtable is Cheng. As founder and CEO of Nexxt Intelligence, with 20 years of global market research experience, Kathy is focused on leveraging technology to make research more human and using design thinking to do better research. Susan Fader is the founder of FaderFocus, a qualitative research firm that has fielded research in over 30 countries on 5 continents. Susan is recognized in the research world as an innovator, injecting new ways of thinking about, designing, and executing qualitative research. She's a thought leader in reframing how to think about strategic challenges and opportunities, and master interviewer and focus group moderator. And the research geek himself, Jake Pryszlak. Jake is an influencer on topics related to research, insights, and next generation market research, translating the space into actionable takeaways. As a market researcher and a thought leader, he has worked with a range of organizations, including companies such as Formula One, Wimbledon Championships, Nike, and Adidas. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. This is indeed an exciting topic for us, as we at Logit have always strived to be a technology-driven company. We were named a GRIT Top 50 Innovative Company in 2020, and combining technology with methodology is something we've made a core competency and a priority. Without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to hear from Kathy and Jake on the technologies that you think are most promising to you as they apply to market research. Kathy?
Sure. Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. This is certainly a topic that I'm very interested in. I would say I am a big fan of natural language processing. I think research is a very creative exercise. It's a very human exercise. We do need that human creativity to do a good job. So natural language processing, to me, is probably the closest that we can find in technology, so that I guess it can do 2 things. One is it can understand people a little better to build that research experience so that the participants can participate better, more engaging. And then also on the researcher side, a very practical thing so that we can have results in a way that is semi-automated, at least, so that we don't have to go through the transcripts and all that.
I think from my side, Sam, as well, and like Kathy said, thanks so much for having me. And I'm really interested at the moment in sort of technology that can enable us to basically communicate with anyone who hasn't been communicated before in relation to sort of market research. And I always think about when we're in sort of COVID now is that we're always using sort of social media or sort of WhatsApp, Telegram, and even sort of texting whilst watching TV as well, and sort of texting different friends and even colleagues about a sort of television show. And it's using those sort of technologies to basically enhance the way we are communicating with individuals about a brand or about a topic in a safe and an environment where individuals know when they do share that information, it's not going to be used in the wrong way, or their data isn't going to be used in a sort of inappropriate way that could sort of leverage something else from it. So I definitely think that sort of social media sort of landscape now is completely, changing for the better.
Bringing up social media is an interesting point, Jake. I guess the question I have is social media, as it's being used today, does it reflect individuals' beliefs or does it mold them? And the most recent example I can think of is very topical, is the last couple of days and what the Reddit Wall Street groups have done to archaic and kind of dusty older companies on exchanges that are pumping them up to huge potential financial gains. So what are your thoughts about reflecting beliefs versus molding them?
Great question. So I think, there's loads of different examples what you can think about when it comes to sort of social media and social media listening. I think part of my beliefs are that I think when it comes to social media listening, it can be used with the wrong hands. It can be used against particular beliefs, and it can be used to maybe forge a particular sort of belief from individuals. On the flip side of that, though, I've seen some really cool ways that brands are using sort of social media to actually think what could be happening in 6 or 12 months. What sort of color ranges could individuals be really interested in? What types of, what could actually the culture be in a particular country? in 6 or 12 months, depending on what's going on during that time. But I think not just social media, but sort of data collection in general. There's a really big sort of turning point at the moment in terms of sort of the transparency of using data and how that's being sort of portrayed back to the general public. Because even people who read about sort of the politics or even the sort of social media posts you mentioned there's that sense of how many people actually trust that data, what is being published online. And there's quite a lot of people now who are sort of iffing and ahhing whether it's true or whether it's just being sort of made up for that article.
Well, I mean, I guess the term fake news is now an indelible mark in our lexicon. I don't think that's ever going to go away. But of course, we can't look at what's going on today without focusing our attention to COVID and potentially what's going to happen in a post-COVID world. I'd like to bring Susan into the conversation. Susan, what do you think the challenges are that are being presented to research companies, both now within COVID and what's going to happen to our industry post-COVID?
Thanks, Sam. And I think Kathy and Jake really started off this conversation in a great way, that they actually, even though we're talking about technology, they're also talking about the people and people's role in, humanizing this. Research, when you think about it, really has three components. There's the executional and there's the analytical. And the execution, the analytical, we're really integrating and we should embrace technology. But there's also that first step is the conceptual, and it's the way we think about it and the way we start. So post-COVID, I think we have to pay more attention to how we actually start research, what the baseline assumptions are, and rethinking them and not just going with what assumptions were based on pre-COVID or during the COVID. And then with people, I think we have to do a different approach of how we decide and group people in research. The way it's done now, it's basically from a company's perspective, and it mirrors how their businesses are aligned or what they're trying to market or what they're trying to develop. And so it's from the perception of how companies see people in their roles as users or buyers. And I think we have to flip it, and cognitive demographics incorporates how people self-perceive and how they see the world, and therefore how they make a decision. And I think that's important.
I think that's an excellent point. And I think what COVID's brought to us now is if we potentially look at technology and two sides of the coin. Traditionally, we've looked at how do we bridge the use of technology for gaining better insight with respondents, with research participants, and presenting better insight to our stakeholders and our clients. But of course, COVID has brought about the need to go into a virtual survival mode. And I think technology plays a critical role there as well for what are companies forced to do from that perspective of survival? How do we bridge insight technology, but also maintain organizational relevancy and operational smoothness in an era where we probably in some cases have dozens and dozens of employees scattered across the globe, no longer working together face to face? And what challenges does that bring about?
I could probably.
You're asking me. Go ahead, Kathy. Go, you first.
I was gonna add on to what you said, and then I thought what Sam just asked about. I thought that's probably a good segue. I really enjoy what Susan just said. I think with COVID, one big change, we actually see it on a daily basis, is that we have to challenge the assumptions that we had in the past. So that does mean that we are looking for unscripted insights. We are looking for ways to hear people directly in their own words without imposing some ideas onto them. It does mean that we should be a better listener. We should be more open-minded. So I think all that requires technology that enables that kind of more creative question asking, more creative environment where we could, technology, one of the things we naturally believe technology can do is the scale, is automation. But beyond scale and automation, it's almost like, how do we do that part? How do we, especially today, in a way that the conceptualization piece of research, we know that it's becoming more exploratory. We need a lot more new information before we can even start a piece of research. So I just thought to build on to what Susan just said, yeah, COVID actually presents a lot of new interesting opportunities for the industry.
So just jumping on what Kathy said, from a qualitative standpoint, the technology I tend to use is to enable me to have the conversations online and to observe. However, I think what Kathy, I think what's happening in quantitative is the embracement of AI into the actual quantitative questionnaire or study. And with AI, what you're taking is strength of qualitative, which is the conversation, and putting it into the quant. And I think that's really going to enhance what we can get out of quantitative and allow us to listen better and uncover the nuggets and not be in a structure, that straitjacket of the forced choice answers that quantitative is known for. So that's an amazing thing that's happening in quantitative.
I think we need to be careful, though, as researchers, because I think in some instances we get stakeholders that assume technology and the advancement of technology is homogeneous. We've got audiences, responding groups that are not as technologically savvy, or because of limitations don't have access to some of these things, whether it's limited Wi-Fi access or connectivity issues in rural communities. So I think we at the same point, while technology needs to drive us forward, that we also need to be very cognizant of who our audience is when we're conducting that research, and making sure that we have a broad approach to methodology, rather than making the assumptions that technology is at a certain place for all respondent stakeholders.
So we also have to recognize that the lack of Wi-Fi access or technology issues don't just affect disadvantaged or rural. I've done research with women on the Upper East Side, 20-year-olds on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and they were unable to keep the connection. There was problems with Verizon that day. They were trying hotspots. So we have to stay away from thinking that it's just the disadvantage, or there's this issue, they have issues with Wi-Fi. It's really sophisticated people who can have issues with Wi-Fi that impact what they upload, how they interact.
That's an excellent point. So let's turn to our organization specifically. What innovative strategies have your companies used to stay relevant in current COVID times and moving forward? Kathy?
Yeah, digital transformation. I think this is just happening. You just have to ride the wave. I think we were born to be a technology company. That's just in the DNA of how we do things. But at the same time, how to be agile in development, how to bring the diverse voices into the teams, because we're essentially, I think what we're doing as a whole industry, we're redesigning market research with technology, with new ways of thinking. There are lots of opportunities to redesign research to do a better job, to better understand people. So to do that, I do feel, for example, currently on our team, we have researchers, but we also have technologists, we have designers, we have data scientists, we have a behavioral scientist. So it's a very good mix of diverse voices that can keep us the perspectives open in order to do new things.
And I think one thing that's interesting is that innovation doesn't necessarily need to be, let's call it, net new. We've found at Logit that we've had some of the best success kind of in reinvigorating traditional methodologies and processes with innovation. And so actually taking things that we've been doing for years, but adding innovation to explore or get more efficiencies. For example, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is our Votified product, whereby general population online respondents in consumer panels can be dynamically verified against U.S. voter lists and carry forward data that's key, past voter data, registered voter partisanship, things that they may not be comfortable to supply to us in a survey, and that's done dynamically. Or even reinvigorating CADI, probably one of the most traditional old school methodologies with soundboard or AI-driven persona technology, whereby the interviews are actually pre-recorded and the agents are listening and monitoring rather than actually reading responses and questions to participants in order to standardize the process. I think one thing that we don't focus on is the ability to reinvigorate what we've already been doing. Now, let's turn to attention. What do we think that MR companies need to keep in mind when positioning themselves for success? I think that's one thing is there is innovation, but in order to stay relevant and successful, where do research companies need to go?
I think from
Jake?
I think from my point of view, I think it's more about actually still going back to basics. So like you said with the different products, what you're innovating, it's still having that core product and that core idea of why we use CATI and what the pros and cons of CATI are, but actually then you're adding that sort of spin onto it to make sure that it's relevant in today's society. And I think more and more that will then help the end user who's sort of using that sort of data to sort of interpret that information and put it into a sort of report or some findings for the end client, because they'll have that more time. I think one thing what I've recently seen, and I want to see more of it actually in the sector, especially in the market research sector, is actually when clients aren't scared to actually use different agencies for different parts of the jigsaw. Yes, for them, it must be so much easier to use sort of one agency or one person to look after, from project management all the way through to sort of data collection and reporting. But actually, there's so many sort of clever and cool ideas within the space that actually you could potentially have maybe 3 or 4 different individuals who've got their sort of particular niche, what they're really interested in, who could bring so much to the party if it was just sort of collaborated together a little bit better, and the end client maybe took that slight bit of risk that you're not just working with one agency, you're working with 3 or 4.
That's such a great point. It's bringing in very different perspectives. People hear things see things differently. And if you're, Jake, that's a great point, because that's the way research used to be, that you had a lot of individual and everything wasn't under an umbrella. And I think that's great.
Yeah, I think research, even though a lot of the companies are embracing new technology, it is, to me, still a very high touch type of relationship with our clients. Fundamentally, it's a knowledge industry to me. So the people at the end, that the perspectives beyond technology. Technology at the end is an enabler. So how to best combine that human element and technology probably is going to be the defining factor of success. So
do we think, because it's a very interesting point, Jake, I wanted to just touch on what you brought up. Do you think that, is it changed, or has it always been the case that perhaps the end stakeholder, the research buyer, that there may be that concern or that fear of what the insight is that we're going to find? I mean, we've often spoken to clients about the fact that research is warranted and is still necessary when all we're trying to do is validate or confirm some sort of hypothesis that they have. But at the same time, if we find out through our research that hypothesis isn't in fact relevant or correct, and we need to go down another path, that just adds more value and makes the research more applicable. Or is there a case that purchasers sometimes are kind of caught in the headlights of fear for where that research is going to take them?
Yeah, I think so. When I actually joined the market research sector, none of this sort of different technology was around. And I thought it was, I might get told off for this, but I thought it was quite boring. I thought it was quite not a mundane sector, but it was quite a traditional sector going through its sort of waves. Yes, it was a really profitable sort of sector, but I just didn't think it had much sort of innovation until the last, 5 or 6 years now. But I also think that causes some issues in itself. So yes, everyone is trying to sign off a 6-figure sort of contracts, 5-figure contracts with different clients, and that always will put pressure on you personally, because you're always thinking about, I don't want to lose this contract, I don't want to upset the client, I don't want them to receive something they're not really wishing for. And I think then that takes that little bit of confidence to say, hold on a minute, I found this really interesting insight which could actually help your company maybe increase its revenue or improve its customer experience or customer service. And you just need to have that little bit of confidence to tell the client what they might not really want to hear. And I think that's where I always try to put in my reporting, and when I'm sort of talking to different clients, is sometimes it's good to listen to stuff you're not expecting and you don't really like, to make those subtle improvements. And if you need like a coffee and a biscuit to get over it, then that's probably the main thing. But I think, yeah, it's those, I think it needs market researchers basically to take that risk and say, hold on a minute, yes, this person's paying me however much for a contract, but I'm there to make a difference, and how I'm going to make that difference is being a little bit blunt, a little bit honest about what the findings are, so people can improve and not just go down this is what the client wants to see and what the client will be happy with.
Well, I
Right,
mean, I
Jake.
get the example. Sorry, Susan, I want to bring you in and Kathy on the qual side, because we get questions a lot from clients saying, well, we don't know whether we should be doing qual or quant. And my question is, well, it's not necessarily an or question. Why don't we look at qual and quant to get that full perspective of and richness of the findings?
All right. So to start any research project, you have to come up with a research objective, and hopefully you only have one primary and you might have a couple of secondary. But the primary objective sometimes can be like a straitjacket, because you build your whole structure off of trying to get the insights around that primary objective. And as Sam said, sometimes it falls into validation research and you really are not listening. But I've had many experiences where the client has thought the reason we're doing research and the primary objective is about one thing, and it turns out just by listening that it's a totally different problem, a totally different issue. So that's what qualitative can do. It allows you to listen. If you go straight into quant, you've made the assumptions, you have the questions, you have the forced choice answers. And even if you're integrating AI, it doesn't allow the person to maybe show you that, hey, there's something else going on.
Excellent point. Kathy?
Yeah, and I have always been a believer that qual and quant, they are essentially, they share the same goal. The goal is to understand people. And then I do believe qualitative insights, when there is quantitative numbers to back it up, it does provide a necessary perspective to the insights so that we understand what insights are probably more dominant and what insights are more sporadic. Like, I mean, without the numbers, we can gauge as well, but sometimes with that perspective, that's necessary, that's useful. And then with quantitative, I think it's way too often that we look at numbers wishing we could understand why the numbers, why this is happening, and what could we do to change certain things. So I think there's definitely a benefit to incorporate some of the richness to the quantitative side as well. So whenever necessary, I do believe a complete merge between the two methodologies would be ideal. I think with technology, what's really cool is that with quantitative, now we probably don't have to show people these 10 options that you can select from so that we get the numbers. We could let them talk, and then based on what they say, we generate the themes based on what they say, and then we look at the patterns, look at what kind of topics are more popular or dominant, and then based on that, we can focus on what to probe on a little bit deeper. So I think technology just opens up some opportunities for us to have more ways to bring both the benefits of both sides of qualitative and quantitative together.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what do you think our end clients think of innovation? So in the market, like in our industry now, everyone's sort of buzzing, aren't they, about we're innovating this, we're innovating that, we're using AI, we're using sort of technology, and we're not changing CATI, but we're innovating how the approach is. But how do you think there's been any sort of disapproval from the end client because the way the sort of industry is slightly changed, or do you think it's all been sort of positive and everyone's been sort of quite happy with the advancements in the methodologies, do you think?
You know what, if you don't mind, I'll take a stab at this first from the research execution side of things at Logit. I mean, it's a great point, and I see both Susan and Kathy smiling, so I think we're going to have a robust discussion around this point. But I think there's two types of innovation, quote unquote innovation or technology, and we find there are some stakeholders that want to incorporate a sense of technology and innovation that will actually change the depth or the type of insights that we get. And then there still are some that are looking for innovation for the sake of innovation and not really sure why they want to introduce the innovation to the research. And that's where we at Logit kind of want to maybe put our foot on the brake a bit and say, Susan brought this up earlier, is look at your stakeholder of respondents. I mean, if we're doing a study with people in rural areas that may not be as technologically savvy with limited, communication vehicles, perhaps that's not the survey you're going to deploy with all sorts of interactive technology within the survey and new types of exercises. You want to perhaps be more tried and true in terms of the approach to link methodology to your audience. So I think there's the two sides there, and our concern is that sometimes the stakeholders are just too eager to tie themselves to innovation without actually wanting to address what the implication will be of that innovation. Sorry, Susan, I saw you nodding. What do you think?
So there's also that whole thing about the shiny new toy. And sometimes people want to use that shiny new toy and it doesn't really fit in the study that you need to do. So it's not that we shouldn't use shiny new toys. We just got to make sure that where we want to put them and how we want to use them is a fit. And that sometimes is frustrating when you get this thrusted upon you. You're like, it doesn't fit.
Well, I mean, a good example of that is back when the new little shiny toy was, hey, let's take our grid questions, and now we've got all sorts of sliders and using smartphones and things. And then clients would say, let's convert everything to sliders. And then we'd say, hang on a sec, this is the 14th wave of a tracker. If we're changing all of your 11-point scale questions to a slider, there's going to be all sorts of inherent change to the data based on that. And so you're right, it is really much, we want to make it shiny and new and cool and fantastic, but unless it's grounded in the actual research, I think that becomes the challenge that we as practitioners, all of us in kind of different perspectives of the industry, but we're all four practitioners. How do we make sure that we kind of keep everything going down the road of soundness, still bringing in innovation and technology? Jake, that's an excellent question. Oh, Kathy, you wanted to add to that?
I agree with what you guys have said. I think that's just so true. I think at the end, it's about what's the best for the research that we're trying to work on. In addition to what you have said, when the shiny new toy, I just wanted to mention the other part of it is how good is that new toy? How shiny? How cool is it really? I think what I'm seeing right now is there is at least a certain degree of disappointment in the industry when there's all this AI, all this like virtual moderation, like all that being talked about. And then people can only realize that virtual moderation is not even any close to human moderation. That is just a very, very, very difficult challenge to tackle. So that raises questions, that raises skepticism. So I think for the industry to truly embrace technology, we need to be very honest about what can be done by a machine, and then what a role a human should play. It's a process. I believe it's and the more we admit that certain creative tasks should only be reserved for human. That's a good realization. That's progress, I believe. So I think in a lot of technologies that we're seeing and we're building, we are more and more inclined to add what we call human in the loop. So it's not about using technology to replace what was doing, like completely do a new brand slider to completely change things, but it's about enabling how things were done in the past to make it better than what's in the past, and to make human do a better job than without the help from technology.
Well, you know what's interesting is, I mean, how many times have any of us been to a conference where the point has been, is X dead? We've been at a point where, is telephone dead? And then when social media monitoring and listening came in, is the traditional quant survey dead? You know, is the arbitrary wording of questions in an artificial environment dead? And of course, the answers have always been no, to your point, Kathy, because we want to introduce as many different options and perspectives to allow us greater breadth and depth in the research, rather than saying X is going to have to replace Y for what we do. I mean, if we look at it as arrows that we've got, we'd like to have as many arrows at our disposal rather than having just that one magic one that's going to solve everything for us, is the way we've always looked at it. Jake, you're smiling.
No, completely. And I think I've even been on panels with the title of those saying that social media the new sort of quantitative method, and I've had to sort of talk about that. I think like everyone said, there's always been that sort of buzz for a new toy, a new shiny toy, and until it's sort of been rolled out and there's been some sort of knowledge about the new product and a bit more knowledge about the actual sort of interface itself, there's always been that sort of skepticism about actually, can it do what it says on the tin? So I think one thing, what you find now, especially in the technology world, is that there's a lot of individuals coming into market research who didn't have that market research experience before. And some people think that's really bad, but I think it's quite good. It's a completely new perspective on the world, completely new perspective on the industry as well. And I've met loads of people in the sort of technology space who haven't come from the MR background, but they've got a completely fresh perspective on how it should be operating and how it could sort of lend itself to sort of data and understanding sort of consumer opinions, and more for it as well. It's definitely fun and engaging.
So something came to mind, and I'd like to ask you guys a question. So I was at a conference not too long ago, and it was a pollsters debrief of what went wrong. The pollsters had gotten this election all wrong. It was a panel of several pollsters, and most of the media research was done online. And one of the pollsters said, well, perhaps public opinion hasn't caught up to the methodologies that we've employed yet. So we're not wrong as researchers. The voters haven't caught up with how we've done the research. My response was, it kind of got heated, was, well, if we're not accurately gauging what's actually going through the minds of the voter and our audience, haven't we failed? If we're beyond the curve, then have we failed totally as researchers?
So it's not just technology, it's how questions were framed. We were in an environment where people didn't necessarily want to say who they were voting for. So one of the classic qualitative methodologies is you don't ask a direct question. You ask, who are your friends going to vote for? And if you, when you did that, you got it much truer. So it's not just the technology. We have to rethink how we do polling, how we frame questions. Getting back to what I said earlier, rethinking baseline assumptions of how we do things and how we execute and how we frame questions.
So I think that's a perfect segue into, let's look at some bold predictions for 2021. I think the discussion has been so wide ranging and informative. Let's kind of drill down, and I'm going to put the three of you on the spot and ask you each, where do you see the industry going in this post-COVID and Susan, as you mentioned in the last election, let's just be blunt about it, a post-Trump world in terms of public opinion and what's going to happen moving forward. Kathy, why don't we start with you?
I would say the world needs more deep understanding. I would think more and more technology that can enable us researchers do a better job, understand people more deeply, faster, because that's just almost like necessary. Everything needs to be done yesterday. Those kind of technology a lot of those probably will emerge. That will shape our way of doing research.
Jake, let me turn it to you. Or sorry, Susan, let's go to you.
Okay. Just basically, I think what I've said in the beginning is we have to rethink the baseline assumptions and really put as much effort into that as we are to embracing technology. And I think in-person is not dead. There is an aspect of in-person, of that interaction, of the whole body, of the conversation you have with someone, the ability to observe that you don't necessarily get online. So it's not about new things replacing, it's just adding. And I think we have to get away from, hey, this is now replacing this. It's more of, hey, now we have something in addition to. And if we look at it that way, I think we'll embrace more across the spectrum as opposed to just going with the new thing.
And I think from my side, I think it's not a prediction, but maybe a wish and a want. It's probably a bit more for sort of diversification in the industry as well. So it's looking at how can we encourage individuals outside of the market research space, but also from sort of different backgrounds to sort of enter the industry, whether that's from an agency side or from a sort of technology or sort of data collection side. So we have all of these sort of different perspectives who can add their sort of lens to a problem or a client issue or a world issue for that fact that can help market research. And I think the only other sort of prediction I think we'll see is that the fact that data collection companies will have a completely different sort of relationship with clients. So I feel like a data collection company could be that end client. And a lot of sort of agencies now, their sort of role in the market research space could change quite drastically. One, because of budgets, but also I feel like there's a lot of really skilled individuals within other sort of niches of market research who can add a lot of benefits to clients in the long run. Where agencies now they have to try and innovate in maybe different ways to sort of accommodate those changes.
That's interesting because at Logit we've over I'd say the last couple of years we've kind of rebranded from simply a data collection firm to what we like to call a research execution firm, and being research execution practitioners because of exactly what you said, and the fact that the execution side and the former data collection side are so much more specialized nowadays with the incorporation of various methodologies and technologies, things like that. I mean, this has been fantastic. I think what we're going to have to do is the four of us are going to have to reconvene at the end of 2021 to see how our predictions came about and how accurate we were. I'd like to thank Kathy, Susan, and Jake. A tremendous roundtable. Thank you so much. Couldn't think of a better way to kick off our influencer series. We'd love to have you to participate again. Thanks, everyone. We'll have to have you back, as I mentioned, and see how things progress through 2021 and participate in future segments. Thank you so much.